There's a bit of video on an improvement that could be made to the Sol-Ark platform. Specifically that right now the output potential of the inverter in islanding mode, or when it's functioning as a pure off-grid inverter, is dictated by whatever the nominal potential of the grid type that it is set to is. So right now it would be 120, 240 volts, single phase, 3-wire. For two different reasons, it would be very useful to be able to set the exact output potential in islanding or off-grid mode. The first of which is in the cases of systems like mine, which is serving as kind of a mini-grid or microgrid in its own right. It would be very useful to set the output potential of the inverter a few volts high, so say 125 or 250 volts. So that way electricity that's being sent a long ways away can basically, any potential drop issues in the cable can be corrected for at the inverter without having to use things like booster transformers, either at the receiving end of the cable, things like AC potential regulators, or using things like bumping the electricity up to, say, 480 volts, sending it to the neighbors, and then stepping it down with step-down transformers on their end. The second place where that would be very useful is for the export market, because certain parts of the world that use our single-phase 3-wire system, where you've got a neutral and two hots that are 180 degrees out of phase with each other, their mains potential isn't necessarily 120, 240. It's usually 110, 220 volts, or 115 volts, 230 volts. In the case of places like Japan, it's actually 100 and 200 volts, and in some countries like Mexico, it's 127, 254. And so, while in certain applications the Sol-Ark would work there, it means that in the event of a grid failure, where, say, the inverter was connected like this one is, where during the day things run from solar, at night things run from the grid, because this was using this largely, well, not largely, I'm using it in limited power to home mode. Right now it's not much of a potential fluctuation issue because mains potential is about 120, 240, so if there's a blackout, well, when it's coming from when the electricity is now coming from the inverter directly, it's still 120, 240, whereas in certain parts of the world where their potential is a bit different, you could see a swing of 10 volts on each leg, 20 volts across the two legs when there's a blackout, and that could cause issues with equipment. Anyways, that's pretty much the main thing where this could be improved. And one last comment also in terms of how the Sol-Ark has gotten a bit better is the smart load gauge, which I've complained about before, doing nothing. That works now. However, one important caveat is that the current sensor in the Sol-Ark, and again, it works now because this is the new version of the indoor Sol-Ark 12K, and this is an improvement which also applies to the outdoor version, which, unless you specifically request one of these, you're going to get if you order one. The current transformer that does the measuring for this meter, in terms of current and power, is only on L1. So if you have a 120 volt dump load, and my system is designed so that I can have 120 volt dump loads, it's going to read as double what it's actually using if it's on L1, and it isn't even going to register if it's on L2. So yeah, that's one thing where it's improved. Also, one other minor thing that would be useful is the ability to set temperatures reading in Fahrenheit as well as centigrade, because I'm old school and that's how my brain works. But yeah, overall, quite a skookum choocher. Again, especially with one improvement made to it where the wiring compartment's a bit bigger, like a couple inches versus this, which is my old one, which I am configuring for use as a supplementary inverter to this one, running in limited power to home mode, So during the day, this will basically supplementary backfeed what's on at least my end of the thing, which is that meter, that load center, as well as the neighbor feed, which is this meter, and this load center. It's not going to cover dump loads, but if this thing's in dump load mode already, or dump load on mode already, it can spare running some electricity because this thing has over 7 kilowatts of solar connected to it. And this one I'm just waiting on some crimp terminals because the supply of everything is kind of jacked up right now. And also more batteries. And I'm also in the process of getting the solar for it hooked up. But that involves, you know, taking down a couple of trees first. And the reason for this piece of paper here is just because the serial number of the inverter, what have you, and on the dongle, which is behind it, there's login information that could be used to get into this equipment, which I would not want. So yeah.